Hello, and welcome to episode 26 of Public Interest Podcast with your host, Jordan Cooper, where we interview politicians, activists, advocates, and others who seek to improve the state of the world. We are here today with former Montgomery County Executive Sidney Kramer to talk about his lifetime of public service. Welcome, County Executive Kramer.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be with you.
So the first question I'd like to ask you is, what are you currently doing, or what have you ever done in your life to advance the public interest, and why?
I've devoted multiple years to public service, having served in Montgomery County and for the state. I started in the 1960s. I was elected to the Central Committee, Democratic Central Committee, and in 1970, I ran for county council. That was the first council under the new form of government in which Montgomery County elected a county executive and a county council instead of the board of commissioners that existed up until 1970. In 1978, I ran for the state senate, District 19, and served 2 terms in the state senate. And in 1986, I ran for county executive and served there until 1990. Mm-hmm. So I was following through on a strong feeling that was in my lifestyle of giving back to this great community that has done so much for me, allowing me to raise my children in the best education system, allowing me to earn a wonderful living. And I felt that I had a responsibility to give back, and I did so in the service at those 3 levels.
So it sounds like you might subscribe to the philosophy, to whom much is given, much is expected.
Correct.
So why have that philosophy? Many individuals haven't given, not very many individuals have given as much as you. What would you say originally motivated you and compelled you to give back to your community when so many of your peers didn't feel that same calling?
I think I was motivated by the fact that my parents came to this country as teenagers from Russia. They met here in Washington, D.C., and raised 5 sons. I have 4 siblings, and they gave so much to us. My parents gave to their children all the love they possibly could, working very hard. My mother took in boarders. My father worked 7 days a week, but my brothers and I always had plenty of love, plenty of food, and a wonderful education. And my mother and father both impressed on me that we were so fortunate to be raised in this country that there was no question that my brothers and I wanted to give back.
Sure.
3 of my brothers served in the military. One fought in New Guinea during the war. I have a brother who was in the invasion of Europe, and I have a 3rd brother who was in the Navy. But all of this was motivated by my parents, who said we have a responsibility to give back, and I've never forgotten that.
Interesting. So coming from a different background and without very much, and having gained so much through this society, feeling an obligation to give back. Why give back? So you mentioned that your brothers were able to give back through military service. Why did you seek to give back through elected office, through civil service and politics?
I felt that the education I received by being in the business world could be applied to government also. And I felt that with that experience that I had in business, I could apply it also in government and perhaps make Montgomery County and the state of Maryland a better place for future generations.
So talk to me a little bit about your business. I know you have a commercial real estate business. It's a family business. Tell me a little bit about the role of that business in your life and how you use that business to gain that acumen that later informed your public service?
Well, when I got married, I was earning $75 a week, and in a package store where I was a clerk. However, I did have the desire to do something that would allow me to work outside. And I finally decided I'd like to build a car wash, which was in the embryo stages at that time. We're talking about a period back in 1950s, early 60s. And when I got married, my wife and I had some funds that each of us had set up. She had been a school teacher, and I had been working in a package store. We had, between those two savings, we had $17,000 between us, and we bought a parcel of ground in Prince George's County and built a car wash on it. And my wife and I both worked in that car wash. And
You quit your other jobs?
I quit my other job and went to work in my own car wash. I was, for the first time, my own boss.
How did you get the idea to build a car wash?
I had seen several car washes in the metro area, and I felt that that would be for me. It would give me the opportunity to work outside, and I liked that concept. And within 2 years, I bought a second car wash. And after a number of years, I ended up with 7 car washes in the metropolitan Washington area. And it was a very lucrative business. And I felt if I could build a car wash, I could also build other commercial buildings. And I built a strip shopping center in Colesville, and Ashton, and Cloverly, and some smaller commercial buildings also. But it's been very good to me and my family. My children were all raised working in my car washes as teenagers. And I think that experience has been good for them. But it taught me that if you run a business properly, you can benefit by that oversight. And I felt that you could apply the same principles to government. And that is one of the motivations for running for public office.
So tell me a little bit more about those principles that you learned by running business, and why other elected officials who you had run against or who later became your colleagues lacked that insight because they didn't build a business from the ground up. What was it about entrepreneurship that really provided you with unique insight into how to advance the public interest through elected office?
One of the basics was that you never spent more than you had coming in. And you always built a strong reserve, cash reserve. And I followed those two principles over the years, and they served me and my family very well.
So never spend more than you have coming in. So always have your revenues exceed your costs, and try to build cash reserves in case in a rainy day fund.
Correct, and that's what we did. And when I became county executive, we always maintained a rainy day fund. We always spent not more than we had expected by tax revenues.
What was the gap between revenues and costs? What was that differential that you kept as reserves?
We always put a revenue gap in. It varied from year to year. There was no fixed figure.
Like close to 1% or 5%?
No, we always managed to keep at least $10 to $20 million reserve.
And what percentage of the budget, if you had to guess, would that be, ish?
It was a minute amount. I don't recall the exact amounts.
But less than 1%.
I couldn't even say that. There's no way of...
Less than 5%.
It's no way of going back 30 years and regurgitating what was
the budget.
The budget at that time.
Okay, but a $10 to $20 million reserve every single year is a pretty admirable feat.
It was, and as a result, Montgomery County was one of the few governments that made a AAA bond rating during the entire time that I was county executive.
Now, was there similarly a reserve fund that had been established by your predecessor? Or did you start that?
No, Montgomery County, Charles Gilchrist, who preceded me, also had a reserve.
Okay.
I don't recall the amount that he had in reserve, but he always maintained a reserve.
And does Montgomery County retain a reserve to this day?
Yes, they have.
Okay. And we have retained
Mr. Leggett has maintained a reserve in his budget each of the years that he's been county executive.
So did you ever lose a race?
Oh, yes. Yes, I did. Yes, I did. I ran for Congress against Gilbert Goody. That would have been 1974. And I lost that race. It wasn't even a contest. He just swamped me.
Was he of a different party than you?
He was a Republican. Yes, yes.
And is that the only race that you lost?
No, I ran in 1990 when I ran for county executive. I lost that race. But as fate would have it,
you were an incumbent running for re-election.
I was an incumbent.
Okay.
I lost that race, and it worked out well that I did not win that race because shortly thereafter, my wife became quite ill, and I was there to take care of her.
Okay. So you at one point in 1974 experienced a loss, yet decided to overcome that loss and run again and succeed. And you had won a race before 1974, right?
Yes, I had.
So you had won, lost, won many times again, then lost, and then ended it and didn't seek higher office again.
I didn't seek elective office after 1990, but I did serve Montgomery County. I got a call from Doug Duncan, and he asked me if I would represent Montgomery County at WASA, the Washington Area Sewer and Water Authority.
Just for our listeners, Doug Duncan is also a previous Montgomery County executive.
And WASA had been working in a deficit. They had a $75 million deficit in their budget.
It was different than WSSC.
That's correct.
But they managed
They managed sewage for Montgomery County.
Okay.
And Mr. Duncan said that it had to be approved by the county council, that appointment. I was approved by the council. I went to WASA, which met periodically in Washington, and became chairman of their finance committee. And by the time I left WASA, they had absorbed that $75 million deficit and were no longer running behind.
Interesting. So throughout this lifetime of service where you've been in legislative and executive capacities on the county and on the state levels, immediately what comes to mind is, well, what kind of legacy must this man, County Executive Kramer, have? And in fact, you have a rather unique and living legacy. Would you mind taking a moment to talk about your children who have and currently hold elected and appointed office?
Yes, my legacy is somewhat unique and unusual. My daughter followed me to the state senate. Rona served 2 terms in the Senate, state Senate, and now she is on the governor's cabinet. She is secretary of the Department of Aging. And in spite of the fact that we have a Republican governor and Rona is an ardent Democrat, they get along very well. She has made a major contribution to the state and continues to serve at this time as secretary of the Department of Aging. My son is now in his 3rd term in the House of Delegates and is doing an excellent job and enjoys the work he's doing and making his contribution.
So That's very unusual. Well, I mean, actually, I don't know. In a way, it's a political dynasty, and well, in fact, your predecessor, Charles Gilchrist's son, is also a delegate, Jim Gilchrist. So there are some antecedents, but generally, that's fairly impressive. Would you talk a little bit about how your leadership and your example and having your children work in the car wash? How did that? Why do you think they're in elected office or in appointed office? How did they get to this point where they too are making the same choices that you made?
They are making the same choices because they were brought up and raised in a similar environment, very comparable to mine, in that they worked very hard in my business at an early age. They were very much involved with government. As a matter of fact, they were handing out literature at the polls when they were 5, 6, 7 years old. So at that time, at that age, they could name most of the elected officials in Montgomery County and the state.
Wow.
And they went with me to Annapolis when I was in session, and they had exposure to government. Both at the county level and the state level. So it was quite a natural transition for them. And I think that they have done very well because of the environment in which they grew up, where we discussed the pros and cons of government and what they could contribute to government.
So in raising your children, it sounds like you tried to impart upon them both a responsibility for service and you introduced them by example. You immersed them in the environment. You gave them a facility with public service, meaning you introduced them to the players. You showed them how it works. You gave them a formal education or an informal education in Maryland and Montgomery County politics. And through example and through exposure, it sounds like your children became interested in public service. Is that correct?
That is correct, and they followed that venue. That is correct.
So it seems as though for our listeners who may be interested in getting more involved in public service, and of course there are myriad ways that aren't just an elected office, one way to do that would just get started somehow and find someone who's already involved and just through becoming more, and isn't that how you started with the Central Committee and gradually getting more and more familiar with the system?
That is correct. That is correct. And it has gone to the next generation. I have 2 granddaughters who have moved to Israel, and one of them is in the Army and the other one is going to school in Israel.
Yes.
And they are also public servants in that they're involved in public endeavors in Israel.
And they come back sometimes for honorary celebrations for their grandfather.
They do, and they try to get back here periodically. For the past couple of years, they've been coming back twice a year.
So why change different offices? Sometimes you've held a lot of different elected offices, and sometimes the public may wonder, well, you really want to be, state senator, you really want to be county council member. Okay, so we put you in the county council. Why run for another office at a later time? How did you get the idea to change the office you ran for?
There's so many variables involved when one thinks in terms of running for a second office. Number one, who is the incumbent? Number two, who are the other candidates running for this office? How are those opponents? What kind of background do they have? What kind of position do they have on the issues? There's so many variables that you have to consider before you throw your hat into a race for any office.
So it sounds like the variables you considered are what you're weighing is, if the right variables align, is this a race I could win?
Oh, certainly, that's basic. You don't enter a battle that you can't win, absolutely. But there are other more important issues. How is that person, your opponent, equipped to handle that position, whether it's state senate or county executive?
So
What kind of experience and background do they have?
can you ever imagine a time when you would think yourself in a position to win elected office and yet choose not to run for that seat?
I suspect, as I said earlier, there are so many variables. Not everyone is in a financial position to run for a office that might be open and available at that time. You have to take into consideration all of those factors. How it would impact your family, how it would, what your chances are. You take polls to see if you have an opportunity to win that race before you go into it.
But why leave the county council if you knew you had a good shot at getting reelected and take a risk to run for something else? Or even if you had an equal chance, let's say you had an equal chance to stay in the county council and you also knew that if you ran for Senate, you'd get elected to the Senate. Why did you change legislative bodies, knowing that you could have had either?
Because you know that you can do more good at a second level. I felt when I ran for the state Senate that I could better represent Montgomery County at that level, at that time, and contribute more and better to the county's well-being, to the state's well-being, than I could staying as a council member.
Interesting. There's been an interesting trend lately in Montgomery County where you have delegates running for county council, right? So in a way, there are 9 council members controlling a $5 to $6 billion budget. So they have 1/9 of that budget versus a $60 billion budget on the state level with 188 members. So it's almost a step up to be a council member as opposed to a member of the state legislature. But it was the opposite case for you. How do you explain that?
I don't think for me it was a matter of how much was involved financially. I felt at that time that I could better service the community as a state senator than I could as a council member.
Any particular reasons or issues back then?
Yes, there were several issues that were coming up in the state legislature. And I felt that I could better serve and represent my district, my state, my county at the Senate level as opposed to the council level.
Now, how would you compare and contrast your roles as both an executive and as a legislator? What was your favorite job?
My favorite job was the state Senate.
Really?
Yes.
Even more than owning the car washes, more than being a county executive?
State Senate.
Why?
Because I made so many friendships across the state, and I found that I could better service my district, my county, by being at the state level as opposed to the council level.
Interesting. Were you able to maintain any of those friendships beyond elected office?
Oh, yes. I have many of my friends who are in elective office, with whom I've maintained friendships.
There's a special camaraderie among elected officials, among those who've given a lot of themselves to seek to advance the public interest through elected office, isn't there?
Yes, there is. And I remember when I was elected to the state Senate, one of my best friends was a fellow by the name of Schaefer, Governor Schaefer. And I felt that I was in a position to have admission to his office anytime I wanted to assist Montgomery County. Schaefer went from mayor of Baltimore to the gubernatorial position, and I interacted at both levels with him when I needed assistance from either Baltimore or from the state level. And Montgomery County benefited from that because we received so much of our funding from the state treasury. And it gave me an entree. And I'll give you one good example. When I was county executive, Montgomery County did not have its own helicopters for emergency
medical evacuations.
Medical and police assistance. We did not have that service. And we didn't have the resources in Montgomery County to set up such a system. And I went to then Governor Schaefer and asked for the state to underwrite the costs involved. And after considerable discussion, debate, he put it into his budget and bought the helicopters and helped us set up the system in Montgomery County. I don't think I could have done that were it not for the personal relationship.
Interesting. So you've gained a lot from public service. We're nearing the end of our podcast, and I'd like to turn the conversation back to you and your motivations for this lifetime of public service. And you said you felt that you owed much to the community, but you've also gotten a lot out of it. Can you just summarize kind of what your legacy and what your motivations have been due to your lifetime of public service?
I can look back now and say that I made a major contribution to the wonderful school system that Montgomery County has. I made a major contribution to public safety, both in fire and rescue and police services. One of the first things I did as county executive in the first month was set up 2 new classes for police recruits, because I felt at that time that Montgomery County was underserviced as far as police accommodations needs. I can look back and say that the transportation system that we have in Montgomery County has benefited from the fact that I felt that was a high order of priority. And most importantly, I can still say that Montgomery County maintains a balance between what it has coming in and what it has going out. And I think that those county executives who have followed me have followed the same pursuit.
Well, thank you for joining us. It sounds like County Executive Sidney Kramer both feels a great obligation to the community, and also I guess one might characterize his public service as responsible community stewardship, where you take considerable effort to ensure that not only you advance the public interest through policies and initiatives, but you also are responsible with their trust, and you're responsible with their tax dollars. And through the course of his public service, not only did he benefit the community immensely, but he also found great rewards through relationships, through seeing the results of his efforts, and was successfully able to pass along that tradition of public service to his children, who later followed in his footsteps, becoming elected and appointed officials. So thank you so much for joining us. This has been episode 26 of Public Interest Podcast with your host, Jordan Cooper, where we interview politicians, activists, advocates, and others who seek to improve the state of the world. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time.